page 20. And we just turned the page, so we're on side 2, 20b. And we learned on Friday that we spoke a little about Ayin Hara, the laws of Ayin Hara, and we mentioned the final conclusion of the Gemara before the Mishnah. The final line in that of the Gemara mentioned that Yosef did not want to benefit from something that wasn't his. What that refers to is the wife of his master. Yosef didn't want to give in to her desire. And even though he had a lot to gain from it, because he was stuck in Egypt, and she promised him many things, and yet he did not give in to something that wasn't his and his wife's his master's wife. So because of that, no evil eye will affect him. And ultimately, it had an impact on his children and grandchildren as well, that they benefit from that exemption that they have from evil eye. Additionally, it's important to mention that what the Gemara is emphasizing here is that if we follow in Yosef's way, we also will be exempt from the evil eye, from Ayin Hara. And we don't desire things that aren't ours. We're satisfied with what Hashem gives us. We're not jealous of others, and so on. And then we learned the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is really a continuation of the previous Mishnah. And the Mishnah said that women, slaves, and ketanim, and children are exempt from Shema. Now, if we look at Rashi, Rashi tells us, why are they all exempt from Shema? So Rashi on side A, 20a, Rashi says that Shema is a mitzvah saseh, it's a positive commandment, shehazman grama, that is caused by time, it's limited to time. And we know in Kedushin that noshim are potter, women are exempt from biblical commandments including tefillin that are zman grama, from time-bound mitzvahs. So we have the mitzvah of Shema, and we've got the mitzvah of tefillin, and they are exempt from these two mitzvahs because they are time-bound mitzvahs. And why is tefillin a time-bound mitzvah? Because the tefillin is you're not allowed to wear tefillin on Shabbos. Shabbos is not a time of tefillin, so that means that tefillin is limited to. It's also not allowed at night, so we don't put tefillin on at night. We don't put tefillin on Shabbos. Therefore, it's considered a time-bound mitzvah, and women are exempt from time-bound mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs that are time-bound. Which is an interesting thing. Tefillin on Shabbos. What is the reason we don't put tefillin on Shabbos? Anyone know?
Well, you're not supposed to be aware of time, in the sense that it's a timeless time, an island in time, as I say, Shabbos.
Well, why don't we put tefillin on? Why don't men put tefillin on Shabbos?
Isn't it related to work? Tefillin is related to work.
I'm not sure. I don't know that.
Either, but I heard it somewhere.
Can I make a guess? Can I make a guess?
Okay.
I'm going to guess that Friday, when Shabbos comes around, there's lots of things that must be done to prepare for the day of rest. Not just for the women to make preparations, but the men have to be there to also prepare.
Right,
okay?
no, but we're talking about on Shabbos, not before Shabbos. Why on Shabbos day, Saturday? Why don't men put tefillin on?
I don't know.
Okay, so the reason is because tefillin is called an ois. It's called a sign. Shartam la'ois al yodecha. You should tie them as a sign upon your hand. And Shabbos, it says, ki ois hi beini uveinechem. It is a sign between me and you. And we are supposed to have two signs on us always. What are the two signs that the Jewish people always have on them? We have a bris, circumcision, and we have tefillin. These are the two signs. But on Shabbos, we have the sign of Shabbos. And if you have the sign of Shabbos and you have the bris milah, the circumcision, then you don't have a third sign of tefillin because we already have the two signs. And this is connected to the fact that you're supposed to, that two witnesses are what in Jewish law, two witnesses testify. And so we have the two witnesses testifying that Hashem is the creator of the world, and he chose the Jewish people and gave us the Shabbos and so on. So we have the two witnesses that are testifying constantly, and that is the bris and the tefillin, or the bris and Shabbos. These are the two signs that we have, like the two witnesses. So the question that's asked is, what's wrong with having an extra witness, right? If you have a third witness, is so bad, so why can't you put tefillin on Shabbos? So I saw an explanation that there really are two types of witnesses. There's witnesses that come to clarify something that we're not sure about. And then you have witnesses that come to proclaim something. So when the witnesses are coming to clarify, we don't know if so-and-so killed so-and-so. We don't know if so-and-so did something wrong. We're having witnesses clarify, then three witnesses is better than two. But when you're having witnesses that are meant to just proclaim and acknowledge something, we know the truth. We just want people to to proclaim something. So on that, it looks bad if you have three, because it makes it look like you need more witnesses to prove the point, as if it's questionable. And there's no question that Hashem created the world. There's no question that Hashem chose the Jewish people. That type of, for this, two witnesses is all we need. And therefore, if you have three, it actually ruins it. It makes it look like we're not sure. We need to prove it, and so on. And therefore, therefore tefillin is not done on Shabbos. But this is just an explanation. The reason why tefillin is not on Shabbos is because it's a sign. It's a nice, and Shabbos is already a nice. Shabbos is already a sign. We don't have. I'm just giving an explanation that I saw one of the commentaries, that why three signs is not better than two. But the fact is that tefillin is not a time, Shabbos is not a time for tefillin, night is not a time for tefillin, and therefore women are exempt from tefillin, and they are exempt from Kriya Shema for the same reason. Kriya Shema is also time-bound. There's the day Shema, and there's the night Shema, and even the day Shema is limited to a certain time of the day, and the night Shema as well is only applicable at night, and it's basically time-bound mitzvahs that women are exempt. So the question is, why are ketanim exempt? That's
Can I ask a question before you get too far, Rabbi?
Okay, Ben.
Yeah.
Sure.
I wanted to ask, how is Shabbat a sign? What do you mean by Shabbat is a sign?
Well, when you keep Shabbos, you are acknowledging that Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested from proclaiming. So it's a sign that Hashem created the world in 6 days and he rested on the seventh, and that's why you are resting on the seventh. So that's why Shabbos is a sign.
So is keeping the Shabbat is the sign? Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the question is, ketanim, children. The Mishnah says they are exempt from Shema and from tefillin. So why are children exempt from Shema and from Tefillin? So Rashi here, the next Rashi, we're on page 20a on the bottom Rashi. Rashi says, Ketanim, even a katan that reached the age of chinuch, even a katan that is able to be taught, the age of chinuch, which it means that he's reached that age where he can be taught to say the Shema. They did not obligate his parents, his father, to educate him in Shema. He's not found. The father is often not home when the time of Shema comes, which means that very often father goes to work early, and the son is doesn't have his father there to teach him the Shema, and therefore the obligation of chinuch was never placed on the father if the father was not expected to be home at that time. And what that means is that a child's obligation of Shema was never established because there was no one really to teach the child to say Shema. The mother is not obligated herself to say Shema. The father who's obligated, he's normally not home. And therefore, the child would be exempt from saying Shema. Now, according to this, until a bar mitzvah, a child doesn't have to say Shema.
Rabbi, I have to ask you something.
Yes.
How come if when you're ready to say the prayers, all the children gather around the table, the mother lights the candles, and the children join in with the prayer? So what you're saying is that the prayer of Shema, in other words, giving the yoke of heaven, is not, it's not necessary for children to do that, but it is necessary for, they have to say the brocha for Shabbos.
So you're comparing the candle lighting with the Shema.
Yes.
And you're wondering about the fact that also that
if they're able
there's
to
two
say
parts
the brocha,
of the Shema.
but I can't understand that the Shema that.
Okay. So you're asking a very good question. That Shema includes two things. Number one is the mitzvah of Shema. And number two, it includes accepting the yoke of heaven. And both of these would seem to be very important for kids and for women.
Yes.
And but even if they're not obligated in the Shema, at least the accepting the yoke of heaven, they should be obligated in.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a good question, and there are different ways of answering that question. Based on the fact that there is a Gemara. The Gemara says that a child, we teach him to say two verses when he begins to talk. One of the verses that you teach a child when he begins to talk is Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, Marasha Kehilas Yaakov. First verse, a very famous verse for children, that Moshe taught us the Torah. Moshe commanded us the Torah. It is an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. So that is the first verse. And the second verse is even more famous, and that's Shamayasaro. The verse of Shema is a verse that even children are taught from when they're young. And what that means is that children are taught to accept the yoke of heaven, but the obligation of Shema is a different obligation. We're talking about reciting the words of the Shema, which is not only the acceptance of the yoke of heaven, it's the mitzvah of Shema, which includes biblically, according to some opinions, it's the first two paragraphs. The first paragraph first verse, but the different opinions as to how much is obligated biblically, rabbinically. You're obligated to recite all 3 paragraphs. So we're talking about the full-fledged mitzvah of Shema, not just the acceptance of the yoke of heaven or reciting 1 verse. And learning how to.
And what you're saying, that it's more than the.
So in other words, would women be obligated to accept the yoke of heaven? Probably. But would they be obligated to recite the Shema in its time? No.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this point is there's a further issue here. There's another issue here, really. The way we've explained it, Rashi is telling us that a child doesn't have to say Shema at all. And then when it comes to tefillin, Rashi seems to continue, and he says a child doesn't know how to watch his body, how to guard his body, that he's not, that tefillin has a special obligation of purity and holiness. A person's not allowed to pass gas with tefillin. And so basically the only one who's only once a child reaches the age of bar mitzvah, becomes a man, only then is he obligated in tefillin. And regular child, a katan would not be, a child would not be obligated in tefillin. And so what comes out from this Mishnah is that Shema and tefillin, you basically aren't obligated until you're 13 years old. Tosfos has a very big problem with this. One problem that Tosfos has with this is that there is a Gemara that says a child that knows how to guard the tefillin, the father should buy him tefillin. So what that sounds like is that there is a certain age that a child would be expected to be able to guard the tefillin properly. And according to that, not all children are exempt. And our Mishnah makes a blanket statement that children are exempt from tefillin. And the way Rashi explains it means all children. They're exempt from Shema and from tefillin. Tosfos says, how does that fit with the other Gemara that says a child, father, once he reaches the age where he can guard his tefillin, the father is obligated to start educating him in tefillin, or teach, or buy him, if he has to buy him a pair of tefillin. Then he asks a question about Shema. He says, what about the fact that a father is supposed to teach his child Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe and the first verse of Shema, the one that I just mentioned, that source, that a parent's supposed to teach their child Shema? It seems like there is an obligation of chinuch for Shema even before, even while they're children. There is some obligation of chinuch. And why does our Mishnah seem to give a blanket exemption of these 2 mitzvahs, tefillin and Shema? And therefore, Tosfos wants to say that, you know what, they're not exempt. A child is not exempt from tefillin, and he's not exempt from Shema. But there's 2 types of children. There's a child that reaches the age of chinuch, and a child that's below the age of chinuch. So let's say, for example, 6 years old. 6 years old, child should be able to say the Shema. 7 years old, they should be able to recite the Shema. If you teach them when they're younger, they're the age of chinuch. Now, of course, if a child is has a learning disability or something, maybe it would be a little older. If the child's very smart, maybe it would be a little younger, but somewhere around that age. We would think that it would seem that a child would be obligated in the Shema. And the same thing would apply to tefillin. At a certain age, the child will be educated to be able to put tefillin on. So Tosfos doesn't agree with Rashi. He argues and says that the Mishnah is talking about a child that is below the age of chinuch, below the age of education. That's what the Mishnah is referring to. And such a child is patur mikriya Shema, is exempt from Shema. A child that is above the age of, in tefillin, the same thing. The child that's above the age of education for Shema and tefillin, he is obligated in those mitzvahs. And that is the way Tosfos Tosfos Paskin. That's the final conclusion of Tosfos. That's how he explains those other sources. Rashi would answer that source that says a child is your father buys his son a pair of tefillin when the child knows how to guard the tefillin and honor the tefillin. Rashi would answer possibly that is a child who's very unique, very rare, not the norm. Or Rashi could answer that maybe that's referring to, it's surprising, it uses the term katan, but it basically means when he reaches the age of 13. So there are a few answers given to how to explain that other Gemara, but Tosfos doesn't accept those answers. Tosfos wants to say that there's a difference between a child that reaches the age of education and a child that has not yet reached the age of education. And again, that would depend on the specific situation of the child. Yes, Ben. Ben, you're muted. Okay, Ben.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't catch what the second sign was. Shabbat is one sign, and
Milah.
what is the other sign that we
Brit
are
Milah.
using?
The bris Milah.
What was the first sign?
There's tefillin, there's Shabbos, and there's bris Milah.
The bris, but women don't have bris, so how does that apply to women?
Yeah, it's a good question. It says women are command mehila danya. It's as if they are circumcised. But it could be you don't need that. It could be that it's an obligation on men to have the two witnesses, possibly. So, but however you explain it, the men need to have two witnesses always. And
Okay.
So Shabbos, you don't have to do tefillin. You don't do tefillin. You're not allowed to do tefillin. Yes, Robert.
So through somebody's echoing somewhere.
Oh, let me mute everyone.
Okay, so through the evolution of time, we've all adopted within Judaism that when a young man attains his adulthood is during his bar mitzvah, and that's when he starts laying tefillin, correct? So there was just an evolution through time.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. An evolution through time that
Well,
a
I
child...
mean is that here we have the different interpretations of when a young man should lay tefillin, and so that's over the hundreds of years. But through that, through the evolution of our thinking, all Judaism accepts the age of his majority being 13 in adulthood. So that's when there's an obligation for laying tefillin.
Right. In other words, for sure you're obligated at 13. There's no question.
Right.
The question, the argument here is before that, would there be an obligation if a child is mature enough?
Right. But that's all been obviated because essentially, let's say it's been succeeded that 13's the year. There's nobody within Judaism that provides for a 6-year-old boy to lay tefillin because it's accepted as we evolve in our ritual practices.
Right. You're asking, does anyone follow Tosfos over here? Are there any opinions that follow Tosfos?
Right.
The only thing we do is before we do start tefillin a few months before the bar mitzvah.
But that's sort of the educational process.
That's part of the education. But that's sort of what we're talking about here.
Right. To accept the yoke or the acceptance of, because everybody belongs to the Tallis and Tefillin Club when they have their bar mitzvah. So, that's the rite of passage.
Right. So you're right. Robert has a good point, and that is that it seems like we paskin like Rashi. It seems like the final verdict is according to Rashi. And the truth is that it's brought in Shulchan Aruch also regarding Shema, that it's best if you teach your child to say Shema at an early age. But the main opinion follows Rashi, which is that they're not really obligated. And so it's a good point, Robert. You're
Rabbi
correct. And I don't know of anyone that really does tefillin early, except that the Shulchan Aruch says that a person who's an orphan puts the tefillin on a year early.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if anyone follows that,
Right.
but I don't know if that's the common tradition, but I think at one point maybe it was. And then maybe it's based on the maturity level and so on. If we think that they could keep the tefillin safe, but I'm not sure if that's really the final. I hope I never get asked that question.
Yeah.
What the halacha is? No one should ever be an orphan.
Right.
But anyway, I believe in Shulchan Aruch it mentions that an orphan puts it on a year early.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Rabbi,
Susan. Yes.
There was either you or Rabbi Duffin talked about one of the holy men that at 11 years old that he had more command of Judaism, a very famous holy man, and so he must have been somebody who
You're
was
wondering
born,
if he put tefillin on. You're
that
wondering if he put tefillin on?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? You think
And-
he might have put tefillin on? I
Yeah.
guess you'll have to ask Rabbi Dalfin. I don't recall such a story.
Rabbi,
Maybe Rabbi Dalfin mentioned it, so you could ask him maybe next time if that person put tefillin on, whoever that righteous tzaddik was.
I'm gonna look up the history, my notes,
Yeah.
and see if I can find
Yeah.
the name.
It could be there are some stories of righteous, very holy individuals that from a young age they were seen to be great, righteous,
Exactly.
mature people. But you're right. I don't know of such. I'm not familiar with such stories. I will also mention that the tefillin, according
I just want
to
to mention one thing.
Moshe,
Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was the father of the Shulchan Aruch, I'm sure that somebody like him probably put the tefillin on at a very early age, because he was really, he was a very bright person. He was very, he was very intelligent. At a very early age. So I'm wondering, somebody like him, because he was already showing how the Havdalah was to be presented. I think at the age of 8 or something like that.
So your homework is going to be to look up. Moshe, we're going to give you some homework. You got to look up and see if he put tefillin on at an early age. That's your homework. Check it up on Google.
Okay.
You're gonna have to look it up on Google.
Rabbi Smith.
Okay, tomorrow we'll try to give us see what you found, any research. All right,
Rabbi,
Moshe, thank you. Yes, Ezra.
Wouldn't the Shulchan Aruch, written by Rabbi Carroll, wouldn't he have said something to that effect?
Yeah, I don't know. Moshe will do the research. We'll find out tomorrow. I'm not gonna.
I'll see what I can do.
I'm not gonna spend time. It sounds good, Moshe. Let's see if you have any source. Yeah. Okay. So the only thing, I guess we don't have much time, but I will mention this, and that is that according to the Gemara, according to at least Rashi's explanation, is that children are exempt from tefillin. And because of they have to guard they have to be careful to guard the holiness of the tefillin. And it's interesting because there's a famous Hasidic discourse about the tefillin, that why don't children wear tefillin? And according to Hasidic teachings, tefillin has to do with Hashem drawing down into this world from high levels of holiness and spirituality that are separated from the world. And the way that's done is when you put tefillin on, you cause Hashem to put his tefillin on, which is a Gemara that we learned earlier, that Hashem puts tefillin on as well. And what does it say in Hashem's tefillin? We learned this Gemara, and it speaks about the Jewish people in Hashem's tefillin, that Hashem also wears tefillin. And when the Jewish people put on tefillin, it causes Hashem to put on his tefillin. And so the idea of tefillin is that tefillin is the gadlus hamoichin. It's the level of intellect that is beyond emotion. What that means is that children can't normally handle someone that argues with them. An adult has a little maturity, and they can handle other views that disagree with them. And therefore, only when a person is an adult does he have something called gadlus hamoichin. Only when someone's an adult, he's able to handle opposing views. And that's called gadlus hamoichin. A child has what's called katnus hamoichin. He can't handle it if you say this, he wants that. They can't really handle other views. It's because, and the reason is because their mind and their emotions are too connected. An adult, their emotions and their intellect is separate. They could be separated, and therefore their emotion, their intellect they have what's called gadlus hamoichin. They could think about something and feel one way, and yet they could accept someone else's view and see it and listen to it and handle it. And so the idea of tefillin is that we are connecting the gadlus hamoichin to Hashem. And so a child doesn't have that level to connect to Hashem. And therefore, a child doesn't put tefillin on, because the whole idea of tefillin is to connect the gadlus hamoichin, this high level of intellect, to Hashem's intellect, and to submit it to Hashem, to submit our intellect to Hashem. And a child doesn't have that level. And therefore, a child doesn't put tefillin on. So that gives us a little Hasidic insight into the tefillin. And ultimately, what we've learned here is that the women, children, and slaves are exempt from Kriya Shema and tefillin. And I guess we'll continue tomorrow.